Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nicole Zafian, and I'm the Head of Content and Education here at CLOC. We're thrilled to bring you today's session and conversation on supercharging your legal operations with AI with our presenting sponsor, Wolters Kluwer. Before we get started, going to run through a couple of the housekeeping things. For chat, you'll see that chat feature. Use that to share your thoughts, respond to the conversation that's happening, and engage with each other. If you have any questions, I know some of you have submitted questions ahead of time, which today's experts have reviewed, and we'll be addressing most of those, but feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box as well. And then finally, towards the end of today's session, you'll see a session evaluation pop up on your screen, so please take a moment to provide some feedback on today's experience. Also, we're recording today's session, so you'll be able to rewatch at any time with a link that'll be sent out following today's session. With that, I wanted to again welcome you all for joining us, and thank you to our amazing sponsor, Wolters Kluwer, for putting together this session. I want to hand it over to Lisa.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole. Really excited to be here. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Aliza Mohammed. I am the General Manager of the LegalVIEW Bill Analyzer program at Wolters Kluwer ELM Solutions, and very excited to be joined today by Mike Lordy, Head of Law Department Operations at Equitable, for our discussion today about supercharging your legal operations. We're going to talk about a number of different topics today, particularly with the lens of what Mike and his team at Equitable have been able to achieve in modernizing their legal operations. Unfortunately, we were supposed to be joined by one of Mike's colleagues, Dana Harris, today, Head of Strategy and Project Development at Equitable. Dana's a little under the weather today, so he's unable to join us, but we will have Mike to play both roles for us and provide us some of Dana's perspectives as well. As you guys know from the title of the session, and certainly in terms of some of the questions we received in advance, we're going to be talking about not just supercharging your operations in general, but also how to think about the use of advanced technologies like AI as part of that process. While we will talk about AI in some key areas, specifically one of the areas that Equitable has used as part of their own journey, the real goal for maturing an organization is usually broader than just a single tool. And that's something that will be a theme that we'll continue to come back to as we have this discussion. That being said, if you have specific questions either about AI or about other tools, please don't hesitate to put those in the chat. We'll try and hit as many of those as we can. So typically what happens in these kinds of discussions is that we talk a lot about some key terms like efficiency, automation, strategic decisioning. All of those things are incredibly important, but they don't always mean a single technology. They usually mean a patchwork of different tools to best achieve the strategic goals of the organization. And AI can be one of those incredibly powerful tools that you can use to drive that kind of process efficiency. So today we're going to talk with Mike about how Equitable did exactly that. They're going to provide us with some color about how they dramatically re-architected the how for the Equitable organization to really accelerate maturation of their processes, their workflows, and in particular, start to achieve some very lofty efficiency goals, which is something that I know all of our organizations are consistently being tasked with. So Mike, welcome. We're excited to speak to you about this today. And really what I'd like to do is really start at the beginning. Talk a little bit about where the mandate or the questions come from senior leadership that says, how do we be more efficient? How do we apply modern technology? How do we stay ahead of the curve? And that's a really important place to start. And particularly, I want to provide a little bit of grounding here. As I said before, it's important to note the kinds of impact that advanced technologies can have, but they are not the end goal. And so as things like AI and RPA and other forms of advanced technology become buzzwords and really important buzzwords for organizations, not just legal operations, it's not an uncommon approach for organizations to immediately be concerned with how do we use AI rather than what is the goal we're trying to achieve. And Mike, I'd like to start there because I know that was a really important distinction for your organization and how you thought about avoiding that pitfall of focusing on the technology rather than the end goal, which can often lead to some mixed results or mixed incentives. So let's talk a little bit first there about how you did that for your organization.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm happy to share. And unfortunately, Dana is very sick. He's not a little under the weather. It would have been great to have him on here because he is leading one of the work streams on the CLOC Core 12 principles around all legal operations. So his insights would have been very valuable, but I can speak on his behalf. When I joined the law department in 2018, I had been with Equitable for 22 years running various integrations, operations type roles. And they were replacing a resource that had been with them for 20 years, was pretty good at keeping the wheels. But my DGC at the time called me into his office when they let him go, and he said, "I'm looking for somebody, and I hear you might be interested, that can help me bring us into the next century because I'm going to be GC, and I don't want a law department that's running like it's still in the 1980s." He goes, "We need to put AI in here." That was his first question to me. "We need AI. We need new tools. We need this. We need that."
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him a simple question that stumped him, which was, "Well, what do you mean when you say you want to put artificial intelligence in? Where do you see that helping you?" And he had a glossy look on his face, like this glazed, dazed look. And he said, no one's ever asked that before, but everybody's talking about AI and how it should be something that we all should be looking at. So I'm bringing it to you to figure out if you get this role, right?
Right.
And so I said to him, I said, give me a little bit of time. I said, because what I really need to understand is, where are you today? I said, I'm just starting here. I have no idea. What do you want to achieve? What exactly are you looking to do from an organizational perspective, and how do you see AI fitting in? He realized at that point that he wasn't thinking strategically. He was focused on the buzzword, and people tend to get focused on the latest buzzwords, and AI has been a buzzword, or machine learning. Those have been buzzwords in the industry. I can tell you the one that we started this year is RPA is the new buzzword, using robotics to automate manual processes.
Right.
But I was able to, get him to start thinking about it differently. And that was really how we started our journey, is getting leadership to understand there has to be a starting point, and coming up with an AI solution is not your starting point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Mike. And I think it's such a common story. I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience will be nodding along, because that's a conversation that a lot of organizations are having. We know that we may have some older technologies or older processes in place, and we want to modernize. And so the buzzword becomes a really easy shorthand to say modernizing means AI, modernizing means machine learning, but not necessarily what are the modern goals you're trying to achieve. So maybe, I guess, you started with the current state analysis. How did you start to think about what those goals were going to be?
So I think the most important thing for anybody to do when you're starting this journey, and really throughout your journey, but really at the beginning, the most important thing I did was I met with every practice group head, and I sat down with them. And I said, what are you looking to do? Where are your problems? What have you been complaining about for years that no one's looked into? How are we looking at this? Why are we doing this? And I put together some real quick things just to jot down to get an idea of where we were on a lay of the land. And really what it came down to is, we're looking for everything what everybody else is, right? They want everything. They want a budgetary save. They want enhanced efficiency. They want modern tools. They want to alleviate risk. Everybody's asking for the same things. So what we decided to do is really just say, we can do all of that, but we have to start from a starting point, point A. If you want me to be able to do a budgetary save with enhanced efficiency and modern tools, I have to look at everything from the ground up. And there's going to be changes that people may not like at first. I'm going to be making radical proposals that are outside of the comfort zone. And I'm going to need your background and your support on that to really make the change. And they said, go ahead.
Great. I think certainly having a group of people who are willing to support that.
I would say, having a long-term strategy also comes with trying to find out like hotspots, right? Where do we see some quick things? We really had to look at, before we looked at technology or before we looked at processes, we needed to make sure the first hotspot that I would say that I needed to improve was actually the operations team. And doing a review and an analysis of the skill set of the way that the person before me had the team set up, where they were being leveraged, how they were being used was crucial. Because before we could make radical change, I had to have a team that had the skill set and the drive to work with me and partner with me to really look at this stuff as a radical change and make solutions and recommendations based on their knowledge. The team wasn't organized that way. So I restructured my team. The first thing I did, the hotspot for improvement, and I will tell everybody on this call, the most important thing you could possibly do is get projects or implementations out of the hands of your attorneys and your paralegals and your legal professionals. I hired a project manager, Dana, who could be here. Unfortunately, he's not. It was the most important thing I did. Every project, every vendor negotiation, every vendor management issue, every IT issue is run through operations. We own the budget. We own the projects. We own the vendor management. We own the vendor relationships. I have a holistic view of everything going on in the law department, and that allows us to move forward. Once we had done that, we had identified a couple things. We did a listening tour again, a secondary one, and we listened to the pain points and the risks. We talked about some low-hanging fruits that were easy to do, and I'll give you a great example. We were using CD burners when a regulatory body or an agency or an outside counsel were asking us for, a file that's a gigabyte of data that they need to review. We were burning CDs and mailing them in the mail. Now, notwithstanding the risk of sending that data out in the mail,
Right.
Obviously it was encrypted and password protected, but still there's a risk there. I told people, and I always tell it this way, I said, I don't use CD burners where I live. And I got a very quizzical look, and they said, well, what do you mean? Where do you live? And I said, I live in the 21st century.
Right.
And they just looked at me, and I said, we're spending money on equipment that's outdated, that's non-supported. We're sending things out. It's a risk. And I implemented Box.com for file delivery. And I'll tell you right now, it was the biggest thing that ever happened to us because it went live in January of 2020. And in March of 2020, when we weren't able to be in the office anymore and we were getting regulatory requests,
Right.
people had a way to resolve that. And that was some of the areas that I saw as hotspots. What are some quick wins that I could do? DocuSign was another one. We weren't using DocuSign. So I got us a DocuSign license, and all I had to do was ask for it.
Yeah.
But no one ever thought about it.
Right. And those kind of, quick wins to really drive that efficiency, right? That it seems small, but makes a big difference in the day-to-day of how people do their work.
It does. And not only that, I would also say, if you can identify some quick wins where people are going to immediately identify the value in which we are going to provide them down the road with some of the larger initiatives, you get more buy-in from your attorneys, from your paralegals, from your compliance professionals, because they see the impact that you're having in a short period of time. They're more willing to listen to you and partner with you to find solutions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think also, again, for organizations like yours and for most legal operations organizations, efficiency is one of those priority goals across everything that you do. Being able to show the rest of the organization how efficiency is going to help them as opposed to be something where you're going to ask them to do more with less, which is often what efficiency becomes a shorthand for, goes a very, very long way. So let's pivot there a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about how you guys thought about efficiency, how you defined it, and then how you sort of used that as you thought about creating this strategy.
Yeah, it's interesting because the word efficiency could be applied across everything you do. So when you hear the word efficiency, you hear it applied to reductions in staff. You hear it applied to time saves. You hear it applied to, we need to find efficiency in the budget, which really just means you need to find more money. I would love for them to just come out and say, you need to find more money. Don't tell me I need to find efficiencies. Basically, the way I look at and how I define efficiency is anything that I do that has a benefit to the department is an efficiency. If I'm able to restructure my department and take a workload off of the paralegals by assigning and giving the administration team a larger role, that's an efficiency from the perspective of time. Project management and vendor management out of the hands of attorneys. And I saw the question about say it again. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it loud. The most important thing you can do is get projects and vendor management and negotiations out of the hands of your attorneys and manage it centrally. That has saved so much time and effort, not only from having the attorneys working on this so they can focus on what they are really supposed to be doing,
Right.
but it saves me the time and effort in going and fixing everything that they didn't do when they did their implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're great at reading contracts, they're great at their job. Where they fall short is running a project because they don't know the questions to ask.
Right. It's not their day job. They're doing it on top of everything else.
That's right. So, by bringing all the vendors under me, what I did was now I'm saving time from the attorneys, but then there's a secondary efficiency there because I did a full vendor management review. And what I found was we had a variety of vendors with a variety of products, and I had no one clear partner. So to create efficiencies of scale or economies of scale, as some like to say, I like to call them efficiencies of scale because it gives me a lot more latitude. I went to my partners, to every vendor that I had, and I said, look, I'm looking to create favored partnerships with vendors that provide similar services to get economies of scale, introduce us to new and better technology, and get rid of vendors that aren't willing to work for me. And I can tell you this, I've reduced our third-party spend from $12 to $7 million a year in the space of 2 years.
Wow.
And I've implemented more technology and better technology than the law departments ever had, simply by asking the question. And any vendor who's not willing to work with me, that another vendor is willing to work with me that can provide the same services. I can tell you my partnership with ELM, because of the partnership that I've built with them, I've brought multiple other Wolters Kluwer's tools and systems in here to replace other vendors because I built this partnership with the Wolters Kluwer parent group. That partnership has benefited my law department more than any other partnership that I've ever built. And then, when you dive into the practice area or the practice group section, it really goes down to making sure the jobs are being channeled to the right people, right? Not having attorneys doing paralegal work, not having paralegals do admin work, and aligning all of that critical work to skill sets, as well as centralizing things within operations, which will then you'll be able to identify and find more efficiencies.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think the more, nobody wants to be doing those additional add-on work that takes them away from their core day job, that isn't in their wheelhouse, but they have to do it because, again, everybody's being told to do more with less. So I think that, again, helps to build the value proposition for all of the folks in your department about what the legal operations team can do for them and what that efficiency, that benefit that you talked about means.
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit, you mentioned about the, reduction of your vendor spend and how you started to really develop those deeper partnerships and implementing technologies. We talked a little bit at the top about how AI and other technologies can really be the amplifier for some of these efficiencies that you're looking to gain. Talk to us a little bit about what you did there and what technologies you really focused on.
Yeah, and that's great. And it goes back to kind of the question I think most people have is where does AI, and I think this was one of the pre-questions that were submitted, is how do you know where to put AI, right? Where do you think? Mm-hmm. And what we've done and what I think is most important is you have to have that initial underlying understanding of where is the biggest bang for the buck? Where are you going to get the most improvement with one implementation, right? That's kind of what we focused on our initial roadmap was, if we were going to do an AI implementation, how would we have the biggest impact on the department? So we looked at things like contract review. We looked at things like a document management system with, the AI machine learning that we'll be able to pull out and cross. And really what we saw was there was one really big outlier that we knew of, and that was within our invoice review, within Passport, within our matter management system. We knew we had to upgrade the system because it was old and we wanted to upgrade to the cloud-based version. And what we did was we did an analysis of the vendors that were out there and the AI invoice review and you guys, with the legal bill review team. And we looked across the organization and we made a determination that we were going to stay with Passport and we were going to upgrade to the cloud and then implement AI. And the reason we did this was it allowed us to do three things. It gave us a modern solution that people were asking for that's available from any device and integrated across all of our tools, including Office. It gave us forced adherence to our billing guidelines, so that the way AI works within our invoice review is it gets placed, an invoice will come in electronically, it gets scored against our billing guidelines that we work to develop, the mechanism with the legal bill review team. It gets scored either high, medium, or low. It then gets reviewed by an external source, so that the legal bill review team, an attorney on the Wolters Kluwer or the ELM side, and they will actually make adjustments based on the AI review and against our billing guidelines. And we've worked to say, if it's this, then just remove it, drop it down to zero. If it's against this policy and photocopies they're charging us 20 cents a copy and our billing guidelines say 5 cents a copy, they reduce it to what's in the billing guidelines. So it allowed us to have that initial pass to force adherence to our billing guidelines, which did two things. A, it gave us discounts that we hadn't had before. And B, it significantly reduced the review time of our attorneys. Our attorneys have the ability to go in and review that and reject it, but at the end of the day, most of them don't, because those are our billing guidelines. So we got a savings, we got a time save from our attorneys, and we also have the AI making sure and forcing adherence to our billing guidelines, that we're not being charged for things that we shouldn't be. The second thing that I think we really want to talk about with the AI is it's not just the AI tool itself. We didn't stop there. We said, okay, we have this, we reduced time of the invoice review by 25%. How can we make that better? So secondary to the AI implementation, we looked at our process and our policies regarding invoice reviews. Our invoices go through three different reviews: the person in charge, the attorney in charge, the practice group head, and then my final approval. And what I found was there were hundreds of invoices that we were getting a year that were below $5,000, right, a month, that weren't being adjusted by the AI when I did a look at it. So I crafted a new policy, and I went to my DGC and I said, look, here's the deal. We're wasting time. None of these invoices are against our billing guidelines. There's no adjustments. I want to change the policy to say we want to set a threshold, and anything below that dollar amount that isn't adjusted by the legal bill review team doesn't get seen by an attorney. He agreed with me, and we reduced the invoice review time on those invoices by 100%. So an invoice less than a certain threshold amount, whatever you're comfortable with, we're probably going to increase it to 10,000 by the end of the year once we're comfortable. That goes through an artificial intelligence review and a person review that has no adjustments. Why would my attorney need to waste time on that? And we're seeing those invoices are paid within a day. No attorney review, no review by my practice group head, no review by me. So we reduced it by 3 different reviews and reduced the payment time by an extra 3 or 4 days.
Wow.
So it's the policy and the process review coupled with the AI implementation to get the most out of it.
No, that's great, Mike. And I think you hit on something that I really want to make sure folks on the call really deeply understand, which is how do you use the technology and what you're getting out of the technology to help drive those kinds of decisions, those policy changes. And so I know there was a lot of questions previously, and we'll chat about this a little bit more about where to apply these kinds of technologies. It's in areas where you're going to be able to get the greatest, you said bang for your buck, I think that's a great way of putting it, is where you're combining not only efficiency in that one workflow, but are you getting the kind of information back, the visibility to make different strategic decisions that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, right? Is it helping you move up that curve in terms of being smarter about the decisions you make?
And the one other thing that I would add there, Elisa, is the other lens that we look through technology with is we don't want to solve a problem for one practice area, right? So what we found was we did a complete review of our underlying infrastructure, and what we found was there were issues across all practice groups with either a tool or a process. So when we look at a solution, what we always do is try and identify a solution that may be able to be expanded to the other practice areas to alleviate their pain points too. So when we looked at things like Archer and some other things, we have a use case, but we understand the underlying infrastructure and the way it works, and we put it in place with the intention, as we're doing next year, of expanding that to the other practice areas. Because if you can solve, we don't want to solve for one area, we want to solve for the department. Too many times people get focused on solving the litigation team's issue when it's actually not a litigation team issue. It's an issue in the department. They're just the ones that are complaining about it. And that's where the listening comes in.
Yeah. And so then when you're thinking about that, you're now talking about workflow changes that would hit multiple practice areas and how to make sure that you're implementing those for all those practice areas. Can you talk a little bit about the process that you go through? This is coming back to the listening tours again?
Yeah. Well, these are individualized. So the initial listening tours is with the leaders of the area. What we do when we talk about workflow changes, or we want to investigate processes and procedures, we have a thing we did this year. We went out to every single team and we said, give us a list of processes that your team does that are manual, a pain, repetitive, things of that nature, and we want to put them on a list and we want to figure it out. RPA is a great thing. So we partnered with IT about a year and a half ago. I went to my CTO and I said, we have a strategy for the law department. And he looked at me like I had three heads. And I said, the great thing about it, Mike, is it aligns to the company strategy. So I've aligned my strategy and made sure that it aligns to the company technology strategy. He was on board. They came to us and said, we want to pilot this robotics program. We want to give you a resource to work with you and your teams, at no cost to you, of course, to really find processes and procedures. Of course, I'm going to take that. But having that partnership gave us that resource. The great thing is what we've done is we have 140 projects on a list. We're meeting with every single one of those teams to walk through and whiteboard out what their existing process is. What you're going to find is there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So we identify the pain points, we identify where there's productivity blockers, we identify possible solutions, and we provide a recommended solution, and then we meet with them to tweak that solution. This is a partnership, not a dictatorship. So what we say is, we've looked at it, you're going to work with Matt on a robotic side, or look, we built out a new process flow. We're going to leverage some new enterprise tool that is available to us for free that's going to enable better collaboration, like Teams, which we've done a lot of. And we've had a significant progress, and people are starting to really talk about all the savings we've done. So whiteboarding is in our blood, it's in our DNA, and that's what we do. But the important part is you do it in partnership with the people that you're working with so that they can tell you all of the things that you're doing and what you need to do, and you're going to hear it when you're whiteboarding it out, where their challenges are.
That's great. And I think it's interesting because it feels like you're really moving the whole organization along with you then in this sort of maturity cycle, as opposed to you're rushing ahead and then trying to bring the rest of the organization with you.
That's right.
That's great. And so obviously organizational maturity was a big part of how you thought about that. Can you talk to us about how you're measuring it, especially as you think about sort of the strategy and where, what you've done so far? How are you defining what your organization would look like when it was more mature from a goal setting standpoint?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's two things I did when I started. One, I obviously have my own personal view based on my history and my experience within, doing other operational roles on where they were. But what I wanted to do was benchmark us against our peers. So in I think it was either late 2018 or late 2019, we did the Deloitte benchmarking of legal operations. And we scored very low comparative to our peers. And that was our driving factor, and it really highlighted where we needed to focus. And the great thing about the Deloitte survey is it's based on the CLOC principles.
Yeah.
So they have created a survey that a law department can work on that's focused on the CLOC Core 12. And I run my life by the Core 12. Okay, I love the Core 12. I love everything that it stands for. And so what we were able to do is then use the CLOC resources to really look at, okay, this is where we scored low. What's out there? What are we talking about from a legal perspective? and that's really where we benchmarked. I'll say we did a benchmarking again last year, and we are now in every category in 2 years' time ahead of our peers in every category on the 12. So very, very happy with our progress. We're not done by any stretch of the means. I want to be the leader, but we've gone from below everybody to above everybody.
Wow, that's incredible. And talk a little bit about this timeline, Mike, because it really is, you know, you started kind of late 2018. Kind of walk us through sort of what that timeline looked like and those milestones in each of those timeframes, because obviously you were about to get into a pretty crazy time in 2020 that you didn't know was coming at you.
Yeah, that's true. So we started. I started in 2018. I created a high-level strategy in 18. I had to get buy-in. I had to do the analysis. I brought Dana on at the end of 18 once I had the approval to restructure my team and the high-level idea or concept of a strategy. It wasn't fleshed out yet. Dana came on board. We did the analysis in the first half, really in the first quarter of 2019, of our underlying infrastructure. By the middle of 19, we had the detailed strategy and our first roadmap developed based on the outcome of that strategy, which we proposed to leadership, which would eliminate risk, identify some of the pain points and major pain points and some low-hanging fruit. And we knew that's where we were going to focus in 2020, was doing that. The one large project that we started on was the conversations about the artificial intelligence in our invoice review. So our first roadmap actually didn't happen for about a year and a half. And again, everything is small steps. And this is very important because people tend to think globally without thinking, how do I get there, right? There's two ways to get to California. I can fly or I can walk. One way is definitely better than the other. Mm-hmm. Starting at the end on what you want to achieve is not where to go. Get an analysis, start small, understand where you guys reside today, understand where the pain points are, understand what the company goals are, what the law department goals, and align your strategy to the goals. Once you have a strategy, you define within that what's the prioritize based on criticality, based on risk. Focus on those items first with a couple quick wins, small steps. The next thing you do, so through 2020, we were focused mostly on, you know, some things that were small, some things that were changing, and some things that were larger. One thing that was larger. What happened in March, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, was COVID, and that just threw a monkey wrench. But it's very important that you're able to adapt.
Right. No, that makes sense. And how did you go about sort of the prioritization and how much of the sort of soliciting everybody else's feedback, how did you bring those in to decide sort of what were going to be those first items in late 19 and early 20?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we developed a technology committee because in order to make radical change, you have to have buy-in from the people who are actually doing the work. So we brought one member from every practice group in, and we asked them for their feedback. And what we did was we created a survey, and the survey measured things across a variety of different things that you would normally, does it give you what you need, this, that, the other thing. But what we really wanted to dive into was this other category that we added into our metrics that I lovingly refer to as pain. Anybody can tell you whether the system is up or down. Anybody can tell you what the cost is. What you typically won't hear, except for anecdotally, is how horrible it is to use. And you're going to hear stories when you start. Oh my God, I hate using that. I don't use it at all. You know, I know it's there, but it's easier for me to do it over here. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is if they're doing it and they're not using the tools that you're providing them, you're paying for a tool that no one's using just because it stinks. While you'll hear this anecdotally, this was the first time we've ever used it as an actual metric. Mm-hmm. So we ranked them across. There was I think 55 different questions. We went back to every practice group and we said, give us your answers. We aggregated that all together, and what came out of that validated everything that we had been saying anecdotally. This is our number one priority. This is what we have been hearing from people, but here's numbers and the validation behind it. Here's where we have risk. This is the analysis. We have a risk here. Here's where we have loss of data risk. So we prioritize based on a weighting average, and we said, because of X, Y, or Z, these are the top 5 things that we have to focus on. When you present that to a leadership role, like your GC or DGC, and you say, look, we've done the analysis, this is what everybody's telling us, this is what the analysis shows, and this is where we really believe we need to focus, they can't argue with numbers. It's not that you're going and saying so-and-so is complaining about this because it's not working right, or so-and-so is, you literally did an analysis from the top down and you're saying, everybody's saying this, this is where we have risk, this is the scoring, and as long as they understand where the numbers come from, most of them just go, okay, got it.
Right. And that's really what fed into these roadmaps that you see on the screen here, right? That's really the groundwork that created those schedules.
That's right. So what you actually see on the top is kind of how we've laid out, and I talk about baby steps, right? So what you see on the top is actually how our strategy started being laid out, right? So the top is what I showed my leadership. That was the first thing I showed them. In the fourth quarter of 18, I'm going to do a current state analysis. I'm going to identify technology needs in the first half. We're going to do a strategy development and hit some low-hanging fruit in the second half of 19. Again, baby steps. Our first implementation and modernization didn't start until 2020. There's a lot underneath that now, but that was the first thing I showed them. This timeline, that's it. And then we fleshed it underneath. The roadmaps that you see underneath, we do one of these every year. So the one, you see here, the one on the bottom underneath is 2021, and we track every project. And the one on top is for 22 because we will develop that throughout the year. So by the end of the year, everything's thrown on there. We just throw everything on a sheet of paper, and then we prioritize, and we go through the analysis and we say what's critical, what do we have funding for, what do we move out, what do we have resources for, and then we develop a timeline based on budget, resources, and need. And we do that every year at the end of the year. So that's absolutely 100% small baby steps at every part in the process, and that feedback drove the first creation of that roadmap.
That's great. And I think it's helpful too because it gives everybody something to rally around, right? There's no sort of, there's going to be a political argument about which thing gets done when. No, we've got a plan and we've got a way to measure what ends up on the plan, as opposed to maybe who might have yelled the loudest, which is sometimes how these decisions get made.
And that's right. And so I'll give you two things about that I know everybody deals with. Number one, the initial roadmap that we presented to leadership was presented first to the tech committee. So when we presented this to the leadership, we said, this is what our roadmap will look like that the technology committee, which is 15 people, has agreed to. So now if they were to say, no, I disagree, they're disagreeing with every single department in the law department. It gives you that buy-in for leadership. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, by centralizing vendors and project management and everything underneath my team, nobody in the law department can do a project without coming through us. So I know when someone comes to me and says, I need to do this. Okay, great. I pull up this roadmap and then we say, okay, how critical is it? How much is it going to cost? They got to get budget approval from me. When do you need it? And then I have to look at this roadmap and adapt this roadmap if it's critical and if we need to move, or I can tell them, I'm sorry, it's not a number one priority. It's going to have to be at the end of the year or next year. And then they can make the argument back. But having everything centralizing, having the roadmap to reference allows you to move things around and identify and prioritize.
Yeah.
Don't let them start a project without talking to you first.
Right. and are there specific, you kind of mentioned sort of the kinds of workflows that you were maybe prioritizing first, especially for sort of those small wins to kind of build on. Can you give us some color on what kinds of workflows were the ones that maybe you wanted to prioritize first or that seemed the best suited to this approach?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you can imagine, we've been around a long time as a company. The law department's been around a long time. There's a lot of processes and procedures that people are doing, and they've been doing them for 20 years. So what we wanted to focus on is where can we find a budgetary save? Where can we find and make it easier for people to do things? And then how do we look at the manual processes and ask a simple question? And too many people don't ask this question. Why are we doing it? Right? So there was a lot when I came on board. The administration team's under me, and I'll give you one example that just blew my mind. So we have a corporate-owned tool to track attendance. You can go in, look, and see when anybody's out. My admin was separately in an Access database tracking the absenteeism of the law department members. And I asked her why, and she said, well, Kermit, who was my DGC at the time, likes to have the printout so he can reference it and see when someone's out of the office. And she was spending about an hour a day doing this. So I went to Kermit and I said, why are we doing this? And he gave me an answer that just said, well, I like to reference it. And I said, well, if I can show you how to print it out from the corporate, attendance sheet, is that okay? And he said, yeah. He goes, no one ever showed me that it was there. So simply by asking why, and I always start off every conversation with someone and I say, okay, you have this email chain with an Excel spreadsheet that goes out to 10 people, you're aggregating it together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why do we have to do it? Is it regulatory required or is it? And then the second question, which is more important, who's going to complain if we stop doing that? And half the time I get the answer of, well, I don't even know who uses it. We just send it out. So a lot of times what I'll do is if it's a report or something like that where we don't have any feedback or direction that anybody's actually using it for anything, it's just reference, I'll just tell them, don't send it out this month.
Right. Let's see if anybody says anything.
Yeah. So any process that we've identified that we have to keep, a lot of these are email back and forth, data aggregation, where they're sending out a spreadsheet or something and 10 people send back their responses and then it has to be aggregated together. We look at enterprise-wide tools. We've started leveraging Teams this year and creating Teams groups with collaborative work environment. And we've been able to move a significant number of these manual processes where responses are coming back. As opposed to that, we just have it on Teams, people just go in and do it. And we have saved hundreds of hours of work just by that. But those are the types of things that we really look at. Where can we find benefits from technology? Where can we find, is it a third-party vendor? Is it an existing tool? Is it something where we can change the policy, or can we just stop doing it entirely? Yeah. That's the way we look at it, and we look at every practice group the same way.
No, it's great. And how many of these do you think you have going at one time? Like how many of these kind of small projects that you're building up into something bigger, how many of those would you say you're running concurrently?
2021 was a big year for us. On an average, we're running 15 to 20 projects concurrently. If you include vendor management and contract review, it's probably 20 to 25. This year, we implemented, I believe it was 37 concurrent projects.
Wow. So I'm going to imagine folks on the call are a little blown away by that, because that seems like a lot to be able to do and be able to keep running smoothly. So any sort of best practices or tips that you have about how to manage to keep all those trains running at the same time?
If you're make sure your operations team is organized properly. Make sure the skill sets are there. Make sure you have an underlying foundation of what exactly can be centralized under operations from a wheels, keeping the wheels turning kind of perspective. One of the things that we didn't have was backups, right? Making sure you have backups for when there's absenteeism. I can tell you that when we left the office on March 13th and we're told, I got a call Saturday saying, hey, by the way, we're not coming back Monday, figure it out. My answer to leadership is what it always is, and this is something else, always position it as a strength, right? I said, okay, I got it. Now, inside my head, there was a little mouse running on a wheel going, oh my God, what are we gonna do?
Yeah.
But my team got together on Monday and Tuesday, and because our roadmap is so flexible and adaptable, we were able to move things around. We were able to identify, because I had the resources on my team that understand all of the underlying workings of the law department, where our issues were, and within 3 days, we had a solution for every single challenge, including having hard copy mail delivered and to individuals at home that were delivered to our 3 locations. So having the right team, having it structured properly, and making sure everybody knows what's going on is key and critical. But I want to stress the flexible and adaptable real quick. So I know we're running out of time and I know we want to get questions in, but so happy birthday to the Marines. Today's the Marine Corps' 246th birthday. So any former Marines, any Marines like myself that are out there, happy birthday. We look great for 246 years old. I live by what I was taught in the Marines, which is improvise, adapt, and overcome. My team is built on that principle. We are built to innovate. We are built to adapt. We are built to move. We are built to be flexible, and we are built to get as much done as possible, regardless of any unknown challenges. So if you build your strategy and you build your roadmap to be flexible and adaptable to where you know when you can move things out and in and move things around, any headwinds you're going to face, you're going to be able to overcome in a short period of time.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point, and you raised such a good point around flexibility, because that has so much to do with making sure that you're able to navigate the challenges of a situation like last year, even going into this year, and then even the challenges of implementing a new solution. And some of the things the questions that we've seen coming up have really been around, how do you choose these solutions? How do you know that you're going to be able to get the value that you want? And you touched on some of this already, right? It's making sure it's, is it part of the core workflows that you need, right? Are people going to be able to use it? Is it going to be driving those priorities? Is it actually helping move the ball forward as opposed to technology for technology's sake? And making sure that everybody's sort of enrolled in what those goals are. I think the biggest thing that you raised there, talking about last year and sort of March of last year, it has, for many organizations, accelerated the change that probably would have taken, 5 years to make. Everybody had to do it in 6 to 18 months. It sounds like some of that was true for your organization as well, but you were already on a change path. So was there ever sort of scenarios where people said, there's too much going on, we can't possibly keep going at this pace and also deal with what COVID might imply for our organization? Or did it really just sort of invigorate everybody to keep going more quickly and keep figuring it out, as you said?
So COVID has been a horrible, horrible thing for the world over the last year and a half. I will tell you from a operations perspective, it was a godsend, because what it made our team do, who were so focused on paper and old processes and technologies, it forced them to think about things differently. So when they went home, it was, oh my God, Mike, how am I going to do that? I will tell you that when we implemented Box and DocuSign in January, there wasn't a lot of uptake on it. They were like, "That we don't understand why we need that. We don't get it. We don't understand. What is Box? What is this?" Even though we had massive communication and training, and we've changed the way that we train people and we launch things and everything else. There's massive communication. People aren't listening, right?
Right.
But they knew about it on March 16th. And I will tell you, we did 100 DocuSigns from October to January of 2019. From March of 2020 to December of 2020, we did over 1,500. And the only reason for that is people needed to find a way to sign things. And they said, oh, how do we get this signed? Oh, how do we get this signed? And by the way, Mark Pearson, our CEO, came to us. They don't know how to get Mark to get this signed. And I was like, we can help. We got it. Right? File delivery. Mike, how do we do this? I'm like, here's the email I sent you at Box.com for sending it to regulatory. We have 12 people that have access to this that can help you. Here's the list of the 12 people that can help you. So COVID for us, I think, was a little bit of a benefit from a technology perspective, but I've never heard from people there's too much going on at one time, because we're usually working with a variety of different groups. So even if we're working on 20 projects, it probably encompasses 10 or 15 different groups. So we're not focusing on everything all at once. The big things like the AI was a little bit harder to roll out. We also got hit, by the way, in March with, by the way, we're doing a hardware refresh that you have to do from home too. So figure that out while also meeting all of your goals. We just moved things around and made it flexible, and we hit all of our targets and goals. Again, it's just a matter of being flexible. And if you can't be flexible with something, you go to leadership and you say, look, this critical thing came up. I know I have this timeline that I've shared with you. I give updates every month. I give quarterly to my GC. This is where we are on our projects. And if something moves, I say it was moved because of this. I have a logical answer as to why something's not going to be there that I told when I told them.
No, that's great. I think the flexibility and the adaptability is just so key in every part of your story, Mike. It makes a lot of sense. Well, before we jump to kind of what's coming next, I did want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the phenomenal results you guys have achieved with this approach.
Yeah.
And I know you've got some things coming up as well. So maybe if you wouldn't mind highlighting some of that for folks as well, and then we'll answer some questions.
I would love to. I'm very proud of these. And again, just keep in mind, although I started the journey in 2018, these results are really since starting around the middle to end of 2020. But most of this is coming in 2021. It's projects that were implemented in 2020. So just over the last year and a half, or I guess through 21 and probably the last quarter of 2020, I reduced my outside counsel expenses by 8% on top of every other discount that we give. So we use all their alternative fee agreements. We have some other discounts that are baked into our master engagement letter. On top of those discounts, I've achieved another 8%, and that comes solely from the legal bill review and the AI process, where they're reducing it because they're charging us for stuff they shouldn't be. So that forced adherence to our billing guidelines has already shown us an 8% reduction in outside counsel. I mentioned before the reduced time of invoice review, 25% for invoices over $5,000 and 100% for invoices under. That alone, that 100% savings, I done the math on it. 2,400 hours a year were saved by changing my policy to just have it go to pay status. So again, the AI coupled with a policy review saved me an additional 2,400 hours. I eliminated an offshore resource by centralizing the new matter creation and outside counsel assignment process under ops. Why am I paying for an offshore resource when I can just do it myself? I increased the speed to payment by 20%. We've introduced the diversity module into Passport. We require our firms to supply their diversity, and we have a requirement that a diverse leading candidate from the firm must be part of the process to increase our lead counsel to get the economic credit. We've increased our diverse leading counsel by 68% on the new matters open in 21. The internal review of processes, we've reduced the matter entry and setup time by 50% by getting rid of the offshore, the outside counsel onboarding by 50%. And then all of those manual efforts that we looked at and either used RPA or Teams or changed the process or just stopped doing it, right. I saved another 8,000 hours across the organization. And in the interim, I've also saved money because I've reallocated resources or stopped doing things. I was able to reduce my administrative resource by 2 additional people. So I have a budget savings that then went back into technology. So I found money so the technology didn't cost me anything. And that's the other thing. Find the money. Don't ask for more. Yeah. Tell them how you're going to find the money.
Right.
Okay. And the one other thing I would just mention here, those are just the 2 resources I've reduced in the last year in 2021. My admin team was 12 when I joined the organization, and I had a temp that no one knew what he did. The temp was gone. I used that to hire Dana, so no cost to get a project manager. And then I've been able to reduce my admin staff by, I'm down to 7 from 12. Wow. That additional savings went directly into either a budgetary savings, another role the organization needed, or technology. So I'm without an impact to my budget.
That's amazing, and certainly something I know there's a question in the chat already about somebody asking exactly how many people, Mike, do you have, because I think she's mentioning she's a team of 1 and how challenging it can be to try and accomplish what you've got here with limited teams, right?
Yeah. So my team, my direct operations teams, I have 3 direct reports. I have an operations manager, which we never had before. And that's just from a succession planning perspective. And she manages a team of 7 admins. Those admins have taken on some of the centralized invoices for the law department, but it's still administrative tasks. So it's not like they're working on projects. I have Dana, who's my project and strategic partner. And then I have Ed, who is my records retention person, but he has a team of 2 people from a records management perspective. They don't work on projects either. The reality is I partner with IT. I have a dedicated IT partner. I have a dedicated finance partner. I have a dedicated HR partner that I've engaged with. The dedicated IT partnership has been absolutely instrumental in coordinating this effort. And if you can do it, go to your CTO. We had no investment in the law department for a long time. I told him what my strategy was, and he's throwing resources at me. because he knows that I'm aligned to his goals and objectives. But the
Right.
reality is there's really only 2 people or 3 people that work on the projects, which is me, Sandy, and Dana. So it's not like I have a large team. Being able to centralize some of the processes and the procedures and some other things underneath my team helps. But if you have admins within the organization, you could do the same thing. And my suggestion would be have them centralized under you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, to have these kinds of results with that size of team, I think is really spectacular. One other question I wanted to bring to you, Mike, that had come from some folks before this presentation was really about how to bring the outside counsel and vendors along in the process. You talked a little bit about the technology vendors, but talk a little bit about how you have worked with the outside counsel, because some of these changes might be things that they wouldn't love at the outset, and some of the others are maybe a little bit more positive, like speed to payment. So how did you go about that process?
Yeah, so there's a couple things with that. So we have a master engagement letter that we require all firms to agree to in order to do business with us. You want to get paid by Equitable, you have to agree to this. Within that agreement includes requirements, and those requirements include certain discounts that and rate requirements that they have to agree to. And then there's also a diversity requirement. They have to complete the diversity information in Passport, not only for their firm, but their timekeepers as well, because we want to make sure that we're leveraging, and tracking that. And then the other thing that they have to adhere to is what's called a quick pay discount. So if we pay something within a certain period of time, we take 5% off their invoice. You always want to hit them where the money is, right? So it's in their benefit to get paid faster. But in order to pay you faster, I'm going to take a discount because we're going to revise we're going to have to put time and effort into this. The AI, when we were implementing the AI, and the way that we brought them along on that when we implemented it was, look, not only are you going to be able to submit your invoices and have less pushback and rejections, you're going to be able to get paid faster, and that was what really brought them along. As far as the diversity, everybody's focused on that, and I think law firms are too, and they know it. They provide it to the ABA, they provide it here. So for us to request it, we're just making it part of our requirements, and they're more than happy to provide it. I always lean toward the money with the law firms. How can I help you? How can I save you time? How can I get your money faster? And that's where I end on that.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And now that you're at the point where you are, what's coming next? Because obviously there's still a lot on that roadmap. You've got a lot of things listed out there. Where do you take the Equitable team from here? And are there specific areas that you're really focused on in terms of technology application going forward?
So from an efficiency perspective, there's technology, and then there's some other things. I do have a 1 o'clock. I do apologize. I'm running it, so I have to kind of join. But we're looking at a couple different AI implementations from a contract management perspective next, and which is really an efficiency standpoint. We're looking at a document tool, a holistic tool to work and create changes across the documents, not just the document management tool, internal and external. We've automated a securities feed using the Walters Clover OneSumX to get all the securities changes, regulatory changes for every state. So leveraging that kind of technology to reduce the time and effort and collapse the risk. And we're expanding our partnership with dedicated IT. And we're trying to minimize any net new investment. So those are kind of the big ones there that we're focused on. But at the end of the day, we're looking at under every couch cushion, and we're looking at every crumb, and we're saying, okay, how do we solve this? How do we get this? And that's the next real big thing for us.
That's fantastic. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great conversation. Hopefully very edifying for the folks on the call as well. Thank you, all of you, for joining. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about how to emulate some of the things that Mike and his team have done at Equitable. As Nicole said, we're going to be sending out the recording of today's session so you can come back to it. And then, of course, if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out via CLOC. And I know Mike or myself would be happy to provide some more color and discussion after this. So thank you so much, everyone.
I always recommend, and by the way, I always say, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out to me, ask me any follow-up questions. To Kelsey, who asked me the question about how do I get firms agreed to certain discounts, I'm more than happy to talk to you about that offline. I've set up time with people in the past. Again, hit me up on LinkedIn. Let's connect offline. I'm more than happy to share any of the information. I know they're going to be providing something to you after this as a takeaway. It won't have my roadmaps in it. I can't share those because there is some proprietary information in there. I'm more than happy to share a sterilized version with you on a separate call and talk you through a little bit more details. Let's connect and let's figure it out together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining today.